And so the only way for you to become deeply committed to a struggle is to see yourself in it. It can't be I opt in, it can't be a seesaw, I'm on and I'm off. It has to be, I wake up in the morning, I want to be fully human. And if for me to be fully human, the next person has to be humanized as well.
This is a time of transition in America. For those of us working in city building and community development, this is a moment to be daring, to dream big, and speak the future we want into being. Our cities have talent and ideas. That's not the issue. The question is whether we will listen. We invited some great minds across cities to hear what they're thinking about their own work in this moment and how they're building what comes next.
So excited to be in conversation tonight here at the new Detroit Public Theater with two friends. There you go. I like that applause. Yes. With two friends who are first and foremost Detroiters, but they are also fighters for the struggle for democracy and justice. Erin Keith serves as Managing Policy Counsel for Detroit Justice Center, a law firm and nonprofit organization whose mission is to work alongside communities to create economic opportunities, transform the justice system, and promote equitable and just cities. We have very similar missions,
Indeed.
Erin Keith. She is a graduate of Howard University, HU, cum laude, in political science, and went on to graduate from Georgetown Law School. Okay, fancy. Last year, Erin wrote one of my favorite opinion pieces in USA Today entitled, "More Police Won't Save Cities Like Detroit. Defunding Police Will." Ooh. In addition to authoring opinion editorials for various news publications, Erin has served and shared her perspectives on CNN, Michigan Radio, and NPR. She is a member of both the State Bar of Michigan and the District of Columbia Bar. That's Erin Keith, y'all. Y'all give her a hand.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Tawana Petty. She is a mother, organizer, poet, and author. Maybe we'll get some poetry out of her tonight, I don't know. She is a longtime social justice organizer whose work focuses on racial justice and equity issues, as well as advocating for data and digital privacy rights. Tawana is the founding director of Pettypropolis, a Black women-led artist incubator which organizes social justice initiatives, workshops, and artist retreats. What a brother got to do to be down, okay? She serves as a convening member of the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition and is an alumni fellow of Stanford's Digital Civil Society Lab and the Detroit Equity Action Lab. In 2021, Tawana was named one of 100 brilliant women in AI ethics. Erin and Tawana, welcome to the Urban Consulate.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so really excited to get this conversation on and popping, but I'd like to first just check in. How are you showing up to this space tonight, Erin?
I'm enthusiastic. I'm ready to talk about some real issues. I'm ready to be present and in community with all of you who are in the audience. And really, I am showing up hopeful. You know, I think too often in this work, we don't get to have hope. You know, we're told, oh, you'll never win that, or that fight seems unattainable. So when things like this happen, when we're able to be here and fellowship together and strategize together, it makes me feel hopeful.
And what is the world without hope, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Gotta have it.
Yeah, Barack Obama ran a whole campaign on hope. Remember that?
Yeah.
Tawana Petty, how are you showing up to this space this evening?
Well, I mean, I feel like I have to be hopeful now because
No, you get to feel how you feel.
no, I'm actually super excited to be in dialogue with two of the most brilliant people that I know, and to be with the audience that's committed to Detroit. So I'm showing up full, and I'm also hopeful. I was being silly.
Full and hopeful.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to assume that everyone here fanboys over the two of you like I do. So I want to allow each of you an opportunity to sort of introduce yourselves through the work that you do. To want to tell the folks, you know, the kind of work that you're into.
Yeah, so I'm also a fangirl of Orlando, so I just want to name that. But I'm a lifelong Detroiter. As indicated, I'm also a poet. I'm a mom, and I'm committed to consent with regard to technology and data, privacy rights, and I also spend a lot of time doing anti-racism work as well.
Yeah, that's really humble of you. But Tawana's the bomb,
Right.
y'all. That was really brief. Erin, what about you?
So I'll give a little bit kind of about my background and then
Yeah.
how I got to DJC. So I started out my career doing juvenile justice work, so working in the juvenile delinquency system in Washington, D.C. while I was still in law school. I went on to do a fellowship working in the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Institute, and that's kind of where I learned a lot about the policy aspects of criminal legal system reform. And so when I was looking to come back to Detroit, I grew up here, I was looking to find a public defender service or some equivalent that I could come and work for, and that didn't exist at the time. There was no such thing. And so I read an article about what became the Detroit Justice Center. It was the first write-up about Amanda in the
Are you
newspaper.
serious? That's how you found out
in
about
the
it?
newspaper, and I had a mutual friend that I saw on Facebook connect us, and came in and talked to her kind of about my passion for coming back to Detroit and doing this work in the way that she had planned to cultivate it and do it. And lo and behold, she hired me. And so I think I was one of maybe the first 5 or 6 hires at DJC. We've since grown to a team of 30. And I came in as a youth empowerment attorney and kind of eventually came to hold the title that I hold now, which is Managing Policy Counsel. And so DJC's mission, of course, is to create a just city. But what does that mean? So we have 3 different prongs that we focus on: defense, offense, and dreaming. Our defensive work is work where we're getting out and we're representing people. We're making sure that they know that we're fighting for their rights. We're filing lawsuits. We're helping people get their driver's licenses back. We're helping formerly incarcerated people who have lost custody of their children get custody or get back owed child support debt forgiven. Our offensive work looks a lot like our economic equity work. So community land trusts, co-ops, figuring out how do we bring economic empowerment back to the city. And our dreaming work looks like anything you can dream of. So maybe it's fixing our cash bail system. Maybe it's creating a restorative justice network. So the sky's the limit, but really excited to be here with you all and let you all know about DJC.
I want to ask you, well, y'all give it up for that. Oh my gosh. I want to ask you, Erin, because, you know, the offense, the defensive, and the dreaming part. And what caught my ear is the dreaming part. And I often ask, you know, a lot of questions around dreaming. In the dreaming prong of the work, number 1, how is it going? And number 2, is it hard to get people to dream about what's possible?
Oh, it's hard. It's hard. One thing that is challenging is some people say, you know, you were given your vision because you could see it, right? But I think the thing is you have to get other people to see it if you want it to be a vision that doesn't just live in your head, right? And so what I feel like DJC is charged with most is helping other people to dream, saying, what would you build instead? What would you fund instead? We've done youth workshops where we've worked with young people and presented to them about all the different things that would be possible if we didn't spend as much money on policing or on incarcerating Black and brown people, and then left them with the question and invited them into the fold of what would you fund instead? You know, how would you want to see safety look in your community? Where would you reallocate resources? And, you know, what does that look like for you as a young person? And so I think if they can dream it, then we as adults certainly can't be so jaded that we can't dream it.
No,
How
that's
do you
right.
create the space for that? Because, you know, one of the things that I know for sure is that sometimes, and I say this all the time, the realities of the present is so harsh that it hampers our ability to be able to dream and vision. So how are you creating that space, right?
Absolutely.
Where folks feel like they can escape whatever harsh reality that is up against them right now to think about what is possible?
Well, I think that's where you have to get in the trenches and do the work, right? You have to be in the community. You can't just be showing up at the protests or showing up after. You have to be in there doing the work. So I've been in court with clients representing them to help them maybe lift the boulder of the legal process off their back so they can have the opportunity to dream. Like dreaming is a privilege. When you're trying to figure out where your next meal is gonna come from, or if you're actively being traumatized by socioeconomic realities, you're gonna have a harder time doing that.
Go on and teach.
So, before we move on, I gotta give y'all thanks, right, publicly, because I don't think I've done this publicly, but I have two brothers in the carceral system. Who sounds scary, but if almost every black person got somebody that they're connected to that's in the carceral system. I think, especially in the state of Michigan, we have almost 50% representation in the prison population, and we're only almost 14% in the Michigan population. So we're overrepresented, right? But for a long time, I was carrying a shame that was illegitimate, right? Because I thought that justice ended when the gavel came down, right? And what I learned very quickly as a loved one of an incarcerated person is that justice also needs to extend inside the prison walls, right? You all gave me the language to be able to name that, release that shame, and build community around that. And I just want to say thank you.
And I'm glad you don't carry that anymore, because there's nothing to be ashamed about.
Yeah.
And even our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated and those who have truly had to live with the shame and the stigma after getting out, after being released and coming back into a society that doesn't necessarily embrace them with open arms, right? Those are the people that we're really seeking to reach and to make sure that they know that there are organizations outside of just DJC. I mean, there are people who don't even have a 501c3 who are out here doing this work. So I want to lift them up as well, those who can't get the funding or haven't gotten the proposal off the ground, who are out here really holding the space. But it's a community effort, truly.
Yeah. Justice and democracy, right? This sort of movement work, Tawana, it's laborious work. It is messy work. It's also hard work. Do you feel called to this? How did you come to hold the belief in democracy and justice and these convictions that you hold today?
I do feel called to this work. There are many times where I wake up and say, life would be so much easier if I just went and got a corporate job.
You hate
And I just, punched into a regular job, and I, wasn't called to show up at city council and yell about particular policies or protest initiatives or write like, how Erin and you do powerfully about unjust systems and things like that. But I can't sleep when there is injustice and people are being dehumanized. And Detroit has suffered for so long, my entire life, a half century of propaganda assault. Like I internalized growing up in the city of Detroit that this wasn't a place that you could be a viable human being. This wasn't a place that you could grow up and make something of yourself, that you had to become somebody somewhere else. And so when I prided myself on leveraging my voice, my talents to re-spirit young people in the city, to re-spirit adults in the city, to re-spirit myself in the city, and to say that I'm going to continue to do this work for as long as I have breath in my body to do this work. I'm showing up right now as someone who is chronically ill and disabled. And I thought that I was I thought that I was committed to accessibility until life became even less accessible for me. And so I feel like with every new hurdle, there's a new passion and there's a new calling to commit to justice and democracy. And Detroiters are on the front lines of experiencing some of the harshest forms of dehumanization imaginable. And really, if you have a heart for humanity, you have to get engaged in this struggle on some level.
Say more about what we're experiencing on the front lines, and then I'll tack this on to my follow-up is, when did you learn that the propaganda that you internalized, that negative propaganda about Detroit, was a lie?
I was an adult before I realized that the things that I was being told about Detroit was a lie. I had actually moved out just a few minutes outside of the city. I won't name the suburb, but I will tell you that I quickly learned that what I was learning about the schools I went to, the neighborhood I grew up in, the families I belonged to, was a part of a smear, like a decades-long smear. And I felt like I had to come back home and do something about that. And so I used my art, and I used my activism and all the realms of social justice that I'm committed to push back against dominant narratives. And so, yeah, it was very hard to realize that this grow up and get out agenda
Detroit
that was
is
being
the place
carved
you need
for
to
me.
escape. Yes.
Yeah, that I was safer here than anywhere
Girl.
else. Like when I got to the realization that I was safer in the city, it was like waking up into like a nightmare that had been imposed upon me. And so, I just, I became a visionary resistor from that point on.
Visionary.
Light words.
She's soft spoken, but she be throwing some zingers, y'all. Y'all gotta be like listening, cause she gonna give it to you. Erin, justice, democracy. Number one, how did you come to espouse the beliefs that you hold so dear now? And do you feel called to this work?
So how I came to hold the beliefs I hold now is really, that would be a very long story. We don't have that type of time. But I will give the abbreviated version. So one of the things that happened while I was at Howard University was the killing of Trayvon Martin. And that was kind of my first, everyone in every generation has that eye-opening moment. For some people, it was Rodney King. You know, I was young when that happened. So for me, it was Trayvon Martin. And then going to law school and saying, I wanna fix the system. That was what I thought was the correct thing to say. I wanna fix this so this doesn't happen. Maybe I'll be a civil rights lawyer. Maybe I'll do that, and that'll be the way I fix the system. Then I get to law school, and I was there from 2013 to 2016 and did another degree, so through 2018 in total. And in that time, Michael Brown was killed, Sandra Bland was killed, Tamir Rice was killed, Freddie Gray was killed. The list goes on and on. Philando Castile was killed. That was the day I said I'd never watch another video. I didn't care what it was because it traumatized me so bad hearing that little girl in the back seat crying, saying, "Mommy, it's okay." And I just decided, enough. We cannot reform our way out of this. They're not little tweaks we can make for this type of devastation, you know? And so for me, that was my wake-up call, that I had an offer to go do the corporate job, and I actually really enjoyed that opportunity when I considered it. But similar to you, I could not sleep at night. There are days I've cried because this work is so challenging sometimes and said, I wish I didn't care.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't care, because then I would have a
Like
much
ignorance is really
easier
bliss.
time. But when you know better, you do better. And one thing my family always ingrained in me is, to whom much is given, much is required. You are required to do this work. You don't get to just put your feet up. No, you have to, when you have this awareness, if you've been granted this opportunity to go to law school and to get this knowledge and to be there during this pivotal time period where Black and brown people, you have a whole movement springing up around you, who are you not to get involved in that? Who are you to sit comfortably and not do something? So that changed my whole perspective in terms of what democracy even meant, what justice even meant, because I realized that it required an overhaul, a transformation of a system that honestly wasn't broken, that was working as it was designed to operate.
You better say it. You want to know what's...
Erin.
Yeah, we clap for that. What's interesting to me is, you know, the beginning of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Before he went into the I Have a Dream stanza, when Mahalia Jackson was like, "Tell them about the dream, Martin," right? He's talking about the United States writing Black folks a bad check. And he's also pushing back against the notion of incrementalism, right? He's pushing back against the notion of incrementalism, and he's saying, we need wide-ranging change and reform, right? How do y'all respond when people are like, "We made a little progress, so you should be happy, Tawana. You made a little movement, so we should be happy"? Is incrementalism the way to go? Is that how we get things done in this country, or how, or is there an alternative? How do we fight against that? Because Martin Luther King was talking about it in '62.
Yeah. I mean, and he had an even more profound speech, if you ask me, his Time to Break Silence speech, where he's challenging us to, if we don't address like the evil triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism,
yeah.
that we were doomed, right? That we weren't going to be able to undo these unjust systems. And so I think there is something to be said about those small, I lift up Lottie a lot of times, Comrade Lottie Spady, who talks about those small, like the inch wide, mile deep things that we're responsible for. Like, what are you doing in your home? What are you doing in your neighborhood? What are you doing in your community to make this systemic change? Because that is how you get systemic change, right? It's interwoven and it's small and it's deep. However, we do have to challenge these systems, as Erin was talking about, that are not going to function in a humane way because they were designed not to function in a humane way. And so if you think about policing as an example, it's like, yes, there's legislation we need to be fighting for and pushing in the interim. However, we have to think about why policing was designed in the first place. When you think about surveillance, it's never going to be safety because it's a direct root of, like Dr. Simone Brown talks about, the 18th century lantern laws, where if you weren't in the presence of a white person, you had to carry a lit candle lantern in front of your face so that those community members could feel safe, right? I use safe in quotes. And so when you have systems that are propping up, that are a direct lineage of a violent system from like slavery times, and prison industrial complex is a direct lineage of like slave patrols and incarceration, you have to say that there isn't going to be a cute way of packaging up that system so that we can exist within it. And so there's just so much work to be done. But yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have, it's a scaffolding that has to happen, because you're not going to flip something on its head overnight when it was decades in the making, or even centuries in the making.
How do you see it, Erin?
So I think it's similar to what Tawana was saying. When I think of the justice system writ large, or as I like to call it, the injustice system, right? We have to look at its origins. Everything starts from its origins. This system is functioning, again, exactly as it was designed to. When we look at vagrancy laws that happened after slavery, when we look at chain gangs, when we look at the 13th Amendment and the fact that it has a carve out for continuing to enslave those who commit crimes, right? This system's origins tell you what it's about. When we look at the fact that policing has been around for years, and it started as a mechanism to find and capture runaway slaves. When we look at the origins of things, then you begin to understand this is why things are the way they are, right? There's only so much you can tinker with a system that has racist origins and call them better systems. So to your original question of like, what do I say to people who say, oh, you've made a little bit of progress, isn't that enough? It'll never be enough if we have these types of systems that are continuing to be what we accept as our mechanism of public safety. And the key, right, what we accept, because we have options. We don't always feel like we have options. We don't feel like we have agency, but we do. That's the biggest lie we were ever told. The two biggest lies were that we were inferior as Black people and that we did not have agency. We have agency, especially now. We can vote. We can go out there and make our city look however we want it to look, but we have to start believing that.
That's right.
Especially when Black bodies hang in the balance, brown bodies hang in the balance, trans bodies hang in the balance. I mean, there really is an urgency that supersedes the incrementalism that folks want to hang up and call progress. We're throwing out a lot of terms tonight, and I want to define at least the two terms that are in the theme tonight, so that we can all have some working definitions, right? From your perspectives, I'm going to ask each of you to define justice and democracy. I'm gonna let the poet. Let the poet go first.
Come on, Michael.
Ooh. So, I mean, justice, I think about racial equity when I think about justice, right? And so a lot of times, like, we just got to the point where, and we're not even fully there, but we just got to the point where folks are like getting comfortable with equality. And we learned a long time
Yeah,
ago,
we passed
right? We passed that a long time ago, right? We're just getting comfortable with diversity and
And
equality and inclusion,
Well,
right?
are we? I
and
mean,
we're
the Supreme Court is hearing affirmative
Right.
action right now.
They'll never
right.
become.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's
go ahead.
true.
I'm sorry, I
That's
didn't
true.
mean to interrupt
I
you.
guess when I said we, I meant,
Us.
in general, people who profess to have some sort of political education around these things, and equity doesn't even go far enough. It doesn't talk about racial equity or, accessibility and things like that. And then if you think about the way that people perceive justice, they're thinking it's like FUBU, right? Like for us, by us. Justice isn't just for us. Justice is for anyone who wants to be liberated from a violent, unjust system, right? You can't be a white supremacist and be fully human, right? Because you have to dehumanize other people in order for you to stay in the supremacist state. So justice is like undoing all of that, is breaking you down to the core of humanity and making sure that everyone can exist within a system as a full human being and have the rights and liberties that we should all be afforded. Nobody in Detroit should be begging for water. Nobody in Detroit should be begging for truly affordable housing. Nobody in Detroit should be worried about being safe and having that conflated with surveillance. You know what I'm saying? And so justice is so layered, but we have young people who are on the front lines of fighting for basic human rights with very little resources and systems to defend their honor, and our city spends millions upon millions of dollars on things that create the opposite. And so justice is politicizing the public, ensuring that folks understand the types of systems that are being leveraged against them, and having an actual democratic say in how we experience the city of Detroit. And so we're quite a bit of ways away from justice, but I'm still hopeful.
You know what's striking to me about what you said? It's what you did not say.
What did I say?
And you did not say that justice was punitive.
No.
It's not punishment.
No, it's not.
Okay. Erin?
So the lawyer in me, I had to look up a definition because I love a definition.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to do a little, just because I like to ground myself in what does the text say, okay? So the word democracy comes from the Greek word, and I may say this wrong, but demos meaning people and kratos meaning power. So democracy really means power of the people. That is literally what the word means, right? It's a form of government where supreme power is vested in the people. Now, when we look at what's wrong with our democracy, it's wrong because the supreme power is invested in the people, right? It's vested in who can raise the most money, who can lobby the best. It's the money in politics. It's the ads that run that intentionally give people misinformation. It's the obstructionist laws that prevent people from actually accessing the polls, right? It's all these things that unvest or divest, if you will, the power from the people, right? So when we look at what we need to make democracy feel real and tangible, we need to figure out how do we empower people, and not just in the polls, but how do we empower them in their daily lives? So if you feel empowered in your life, you're more likely to go down to a council member and say, you know what, I don't appreciate the way my city is looking right now. I'm not feeling this because I feel empowered to do something about it. Right. The problem is that people feel disempowered. They don't feel like if they go cast their vote, it's going to make a difference. I can't tell you how many people I've said, are you going to go vote? And they say, vote for what?
Right.
Why? My hood looked the same under Bush as it did under Obama. And they don't have a concept. They don't have a concept for being empowered, right? So that's, to me, where we need to go with democracy, is empowering people in their daily lives by making sure their kids can go to schools where they're proud to attend those schools, making sure they go to jobs where they're happy to have those jobs and actually make a livable wage, are able to afford housing, are able to afford to even call their loved one who's incarcerated, right? Basic things that a person living in a just society, moving on to justice, should have, right? So justice, let's look at the definition for that. It is the principle or ideal of dealing for right action. Right action. Now, people are going to disagree about what's right and what's wrong, but I think there's certain things fundamentally we can agree that are right versus wrong. It's wrong for kids to not feel safe in their community. It's wrong for kids to go to schools and not have books or not have air conditioning in the summer and heat in the winter. It's wrong for people to have to walk around fearing for their safety in their community, right? So when we look at that, I think we have to ground ourselves in what is a just city. A just city is going to right all of those wrongs I just listed, and it's going to make people, going back to democracy, feel empowered to participate in their own city, in their own democratic processes. So that's what I think.
Thank you. On democracy, it's midterm election season, and democracy is on the ballot in so many states, right? And it is a messaging and narrative point of the Democratic Party to say that this election, democracy is at stake, right? But, one of the things that I thought about as, not a defense, but just a question to some of our Democratic colleagues is that Detroit specifically had gone through beta testing of what it is like to strip away democracy, right? Through state-sanctioned emergency management, through the bankruptcy, through the taking over of our schools. And when Detroiters outcried about not having the democratic power that is a right to every American citizen in this country, when Detroiters outcried and said, a Democratic governor that we elected imposed this upon us, nobody heard it. Right? And so now we are in a place where we're trying to drum up excitement and turnout around democracy. And Detroiters is like, where were y'all 12 years ago when we were going through this? And so how do you feel like this democracy conversation, right, this power to the people, powerful people, sits with Detroiters who had to go through the trauma of having a democratic government at one point and seeing it go away piece by piece? Tawana.
I'm glad you got that question first.
Well, I mean, I was part of Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management for many years, and you're right. I mean, we screamed to the rooftops trying to resist emergency management, and we saw emergency management rip through our school system. We saw it rip through the city. We saw ourselves get forced into a contrite bankruptcy, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that Detroiters are fed up. They're fed up. And so a lot of people say, well, they're not showing up to the polls because, they're not interested. They're complicit. But Detroiters are not showing up to the polls because they've seen how disenfranchised they've been by the electoral system and the people who were supposedly elected to represent their interests. Now, I'm not advocating for not showing up to the polls because I've seen the benefit of getting out there and making sure that the things that we want are legislatively voted on. However, they're tired of the okie doke. They're tired of being paraded, false hope, having people come into their neighborhoods just at the time when there's time to elect a person and then disappearing for the rest of that and only investing in, 3.2 miles of the city and extracting and allowing for, we had $600 million worth of tax foreclosures leveraged against thousands of Detroit residents unjustly, and those folks have not been made whole. And so when you're living in a situation where residents have lost their neighbors, we had to fight and get legislation passed to get water back on in the middle of a pandemic. There's so many things that have happened to Detroiters that they're getting to the point where they're like, democracy, what does that even mean for a predominantly Black city? And so, I'm still coming off the heartbreak of Proposal P, right? I'm still coming off the heartbreak of that long-standing activism with the Detroiters Bill of Rights that literally was reparations. It was a roadmap for affordable water, affordable housing, accessibility, pushing back against militarized policing and surveillance. However, there was such a massive campaign to paint it as a problem that Detroiters were like, I don't want another problem. We got enough problems, you know? And so, yeah, it's gotten very difficult to analyze and interpret and exercise democracy in a city where there's so many systems lined up to prevent it.
Mm-hmm. And you know, folks come to us talking about it like this new thing that happened in 2020, and
Right.
it's not new to Detroiters. What is democracy, Erin, supposed to look like in Detroit?
What is it supposed to look like? I mean, for starters, it looks like, one, everyone having election day off and everyone having an accessible way to get to the polls, right? We don't have robust public transit to even get you from where you are in this city downtown to even cast a vote early on Grand Boulevard, right? So when we look at what democracy could be and what it should look like, first we have to start there. People can't even get to the polls sometimes,
Right.
or their polling location is closed, or they're confused. We need to make sure voting is accessible, that people who want to vote, one, have opportunities to understand what's on the ballot and not just on a billboard and not just from a catchy slogan. Like, we need more people invested before it's election time explaining these concepts. Democracy in Detroit should look like individuals being able to participate all the time in their processes. Recently, we went down and we were trying to give public comment about ShotSpotter, and we wanted to ensure
Let
that
folks know what ShotSpotter is.
So ShotSpotter is basically microphones in the hood. It is a gunshot
I
detection.
never heard it described that way.
That's what it is.
Microphones in the hood.
It is a gunshot detection system. Well, you said explain. I just.
No. You put it in our laps. Thank you.
You're welcome. So it is, to be more specific, it is a gunshot detection system. That is what it's supposed to be, that places microphones, technology to pick up gunshots. The problem is that, number one, the data is all over the place and hasn't really shown its efficacy, and hasn't really shown that it's recovered weapons after gunshots have been detected. It also has shown that there are false alerts, such as things like a firecracker going off or someone blowing their tire out. So when we look at the data, initially what was proposed was $7 million coming from our ARPA funds, so our American Rescue Plan money, which came off of COVID, being used to expand ShotSpotter throughout this city through a $7 million contract. And so many of us went down to kind of voice our displeasure with the fact that the city was taking this contract up, that they were planning on using ARPA funds for that. And ultimately, the contract was revisited and the decision was made that it would be coming from other funds, not ARPA funds, but that they would ultimately approve the contract on a 5-4 vote. And so the reason I wanted to bring that up as a kind of example of what's wrong with our democracy was just the process itself. You get down there to city council, people have taken off time from work, people have made holes in their schedule to be there as long as needed to kind of share their perspective. Some people weren't able to sit. We were down there for hours. There was no access to water.
5 hours.
People got 60 seconds to share about this important issue and were cut off at the end of 60 seconds. So you were forced to try to get as much out as you could. Imagine someone who has never participated in a democratic process at all, who has never come down to try to talk to their representatives or their council members about anything. And that's the experience they have. Stand in the hallway until you can't stand anymore. You can't bring water in the room. Be quiet, don't say anything. Like, no one would feel engaged with that process. I wouldn't want to come back if I wasn't being paid through my job to be there in the first place, right? Like, so I think that's important, is we need to look at how our systems look, and I'm sorry to, go off on this tangent, but we need to look at how our systems look and whether they're accessible, whether they're inclusive, whether they're like, we want you to be part of this process, or whether they're like, no, we really don't want you here. We just want you to reelect us when it's time for you to vote, and shame on you for not coming to the polls. So that's what's wrong with our democracy, and it should be more accessible.
Tawana, I want to ask you this question. You often talk about, Detroiters wanting to feel seen and not surveilled, but you often talk about this conflation of safety and surveillance. It's a conversation that is top of the messaging board for the Republican Party this election cycle around crime, but the political establishment here in Detroit is also having this conversation, and it's supposed to be a democratic political system here in the city of Detroit in terms of political party that has resulted in policies and contract approvals like ShotSpotter. Tell us what the difference is between safety and surveillance, and why it is a justice issue.
Yeah, so safety and the conflation between surveillance and safety has been, and being seen and being watched, has been a dangerous conflation that has resulted in the city spending, we're around $40 million now on mass surveillance technologies, drones, surveillance helicopters, traffic surveillance cameras, facial recognition, ShotSpotter, et cetera. And community members don't feel any safer, right? And so now we're living in a panopticon where you can't see all the surveillance, but you're being watched at all times, right? And so we're in a situation now where community members are, it's literally like a coercive relationship, because now your behavior is being regulated, right? So the way that I navigate the city now is, oh man, that's a green light location. I don't actually feel like being watched by the police, so I'm gonna drive out of my way to go to a place that isn't surveilled. And so it becomes like a social control mechanism where everywhere you go, there's surveillance, but community members aren't feeling safer. And so that's a justice issue, because we've been duped into believing that if we just allow this never-ending investment into these technologies, which really are tech lobbyists coming into law enforcement agencies and cities and saying, you know, we'll control the population for you, don't worry about it. And so their stocks are going through the roof, like ShotSpotter stock has gone through the roof since Detroit got on board with ShotSpotter.
That's a publicly traded company? I didn't know
Yes,
that. Wow.
publicly traded
Based in
company. And so we're looking at and California, which has some of the strictest privacy laws in place. So you have Silicon Valley folks who put policies in place to protect their communities. And you have people who are like at tech companies that won't even let their children get on the same sites that they've created for us. But it's a justice issue, because that narrative has weaponized safety against us instead of creating a situation where we can have quality of life, where we can have investments in things that actually create safety. When I talk to young people and I ask them, what makes you feel safe? None of them ever say ShotSpotter or surveillance technology, right? They say, oh, knowing who my neighbor is, or, my mom being home or my dad being home, like everyday things where they have family and village and community, not surveillance. And so we're living in a dangerous situation right now where there's more data being extracted about us and in our communities by tech lobbyists that don't have any regulation. There's no federal regulation to prevent them from leveraging any of this stuff that's extracted from us for harmful or nefarious purposes.
So giving up like personal liberties for the feeling or the perception of safety, and you just quantified the cost, right? Without that even really, coming to pass, because Detroiters really don't feel any safer.
It's
right?
like I always compared it to the American dream, right? How many people know folks who actually attained it? You never really have to attain it. You just have to be promised that it could potentially happen, right? And so it's it's this thing with like, just give us one more thing, but to what end? To what end do we allow for these types of things to be put upon our communities before we say enough is enough?
Yeah.
It hasn't worked.
You mentioned narrative in your answer, and I am a person that is all about narrative. And Erin, I want to come to you on this narrative piece and messaging piece. How important, number one, is narrative and messaging toward moving the needle to a more equitable and just society? And after you answer that question, did defund the police work?
All right. So, first, narrative. You can't move the needle on anything if you don't have a story as to why the needle needs to move. So narrative is going to be critical no matter what needle you're trying to move. I think it's really important that the right narrative gets out there. I think too often, you use the word propaganda. I think too often we are conflating justice, safety, and policing into one kind of general term when we say public safety. And I think that that's a narrative that needs to shift. That's a narrative that has for too long permeated the public space and been the only narrative. If you're against police, then there's no way you could be for public safety. If you're against how much money we're spending on policing, there's no way you could be for just communities and just outcomes. But it's a both and. You can be a person who's passionate about ensuring that our communities are safe and are fair, while still being a person who wants to think analytically and critically
You can
about
be a
how
layered
much money
person.
we're
You
spending.
can be a layered and nuanced person.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow. And so to answer your second question about did defund work? So I've had a lot of conversation about this recently. And some people are like, defund is so inflammatory. I wish we could just pick a new word. Why do you all use that word? It's just so egregious and all of these things. And I love to point out that for years, defund is a fairly new phenomenon, right? For years, people were saying, we should reallocate resources. We should just get out there and make sure our communities are adequately funded. We should pour more money into this. And the response was, oh, that's nice. Where's the money gonna come from? Oh, this would be perfect. This is a pipe dream. Oh, we'll get back to you on that. And it never hit mainstream news. It was never inflammatory enough to get there. It didn't ruffle the right feathers to get us having conversations like this about policing. So when you ask, did the term or did the campaign to defund work? The answer is yes, because we're still talking about it. We're still here having a conversation about what it means to reallocate resources. And so now the narrative might shift. Now the narrative gets more tangible on, yes, we did say defund, but here's what we mean. We mean fund gun buyback programs, violence interrupters, bedside trauma interventionists, fund affordable housing, fund schools that are adequately resourced, right? That is what we mean when we say reallocate, divest from carceral structures to invest in communities. But if no one had ever said defund, we'd never even be having this conversation right now. So I think it did work.
Okay.
And I just want to say,
Go ahead.
I want to know where everybody was when they defunded the schools and defunded the water infrastructure and defunded all of the city resources and mental health institutions. Like, where was everybody when all of the funding was taken out of those structures? I'm with Erin. It's like, I'm glad we having this conversation finally.
Right.
Erin, I want to ask you this question because you were published in USA Today. And you named an observation of Black affluence and Black poverty being in close proximity in a city like Detroit. You said you can't grow up Black in this city, no matter how privileged, and be completely removed from the realities. The degrees of separation are too small. Talk about how movement work has to exist within this duality in cities like Detroit.
Absolutely. So here, I think one of the major things, like I said before, was that being able to dream is a privilege, right?
Yeah.
Being able to hope is a privilege. Being able to envision a life different from what you see every day is a privilege. And when you're actively being traumatized by your socioeconomic realities, you don't have as much of an opportunity to do that. It's a bold and daring step to fight through the trauma to be able to do that. And it requires a certain amount of tenacity and resilience that every person doesn't have to have. Every person is not able to have that, right? And so when I look at kind of what I mean to grow up in both realities and what it means for organizers, it means you have to honor the fact that people are living through real trauma every day. And also, you have to honor the fact that you may have your own story that at some point you need to share to help everyone understand that you are a credible messenger, that you're a person who is a born and raised Detroiter who understands what they're saying, who understands what,
That's right.
what they're living through. And the things you don't understand, you need to be willing to listen. to listen to understand, not just come in with your talking points and, oh, I got this degree and I did this and I have research. Listen to what people are saying, because once they feel heard, then they can better work with you. Those closest to the problem are the closest to the solution. Right. So you can't come in and be so sure and so certain of everything you believe that you're unwilling to accept dialogue and feedback from others, especially in a city like Detroit, where there truly are haves and have-nots, and people who vote for their interests against the have-nots. And so we really have to figure out a way to work kind of together and build more unity among those who are privileged and those who may not have had all the opportunities they should have had growing up here.
Your lived experience makes you a credible messenger. I'm taking that language, and I'll cite you, but I'm taking it.
Me too.
I want to talk about on-ramps to this work, because the both of you are in the trenches, right? And earlier on, you talked about the amazing work that you've done, and we've named, some of the realities that we see, some that are trending toward building more just and equitable cities, and some factors that prohibit that progression, right? But for those of us here, and for those folks who are watching, who are like, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, and I'm ready to participate. Tawana, you often have this conversation a lot around co-liberation, right? Tell us some of the on-ramps to the work where we can get involved, where Detroiters can get involved. But, I'm also seeing that there is a lot of interest from our brothers and sisters who ain't melanated that want to get involved as well, right? Where do we start? Where do we start toward progress?
Well, so I do this whole thing about, there's allyship, there's co-conspirators, there's people in solidarity, and then there's co-liberators. People who want to be in collective liberation, folks who understand that their liberation is tied up into my liberation. And so the only way for you to become deeply committed to a struggle is to see yourself in it, right? And so a lot of times, and that goes for people that are non-Black, right? And so I mentioned this earlier, you can't be racist, you can't internalize white supremacy or any of that and be fully human if you're not constantly trying to undo that, because that is a dehumanization as well. And so I ask people all the time, like I do a lot of anti-racism workshops, and I always ask white people, like, so who are some of your people that you study that has you want to be an anti-racist, right? And 99% of the time they name somebody Black. And I said, who do you know that's white in legacy and history that has done anti-racism work? Because if you can't wake up and see yourself in it, it'll become an option. And so we got to get to the point where it's not an option for anybody, where you wake up and you say, I'm connected to a lineage of people who have done this work, and it's in my DNA. Nobody's DNA has all harmful things. We have people in our DNA who have done good made good contributions to history. And that goes for white people and all other races as well. And if you can't find a person, then you become the person. Come on now. And so that's where I am. Like, it can't be a weekend thing. It can't be I opt in. It can't be a seesaw. I'm on and I'm off. It has to be, I wake up in the morning, I want to be fully human. And if for me to be fully human, the next person has to be humanized as well. And so that's what I mean by collective liberation or co-liberation.
You and Ingrid LaFleur, our resident Afrofuturist here in the city of Detroit, sound a lot alike in answering that question. Erin, I want to ask you this question. What's at stake if cities do not prioritize justice and democracy?
More of this. More of this, right? More of people weaponizing the public safety conversation. More of young people being shot at school. More of people coming home from periods of incarceration and not being able to get jobs or get a driver's license or really just rejoin society. More of kids being removed from their households when their parents enter the injustice system. That's what's at stake. Loss of our constitutional rights around reproductive justice. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so the stakes are honestly higher than they've been in a long time. And I think that we need to wake up, we need to pay attention, and we need to figure out, how do we engage? You talked about on-ramps, but I would, you did such an excellent job with that question. I want to flip it. Let's talk about some off-ramps and how people can get out the way, right? Because I think that's equally important. That's equally important. Like, are you actually engaging with solutions for your community, or are you just saying, where are the police? Are you actually saying, like, wow, how do we, look at what they're doing in Ann Arbor. They're creating a first responder task force that's not police-based, where people can come during a mental health emergency, unarmed first response. There's so many innovative ways that people are tackling these issues. But if you're not willing to read or to use Google or to at least try, go down to the public library where you can access books for free. Yeah. If you're not willing to do that, then you're impeding traffic.
Come on. Hey, come on now.
She said off ramps. Exit, stage left. All right. Can we really quickly, we got like 3 minutes left, create just a dream space right here, right now, right? I understand the realities of the present are harsh, but let's try to push past that, right? And let's create a dream space. When you think about the future of Detroit, right? When you dream about the future, what do you see? And how are you building toward that today, Tawana?
Yeah, when I think about the future of Detroit, I think about young people who wake up every day proud of where they live and thrive and go to school. And I think about a situation where, there isn't a constant dispiriting of the residents of Detroit. I think about healthy foods in every neighborhood and recreation in every neighborhood. I think about families being able to afford water, or water being free because it's a human right, but that's a whole nother conversation, right? I think about housing. Our elders, once they pay off a mortgage, they own that house. Nobody's coming after them for taxes. Like, to me, the fact that so many of our senior citizens have lost their homes after they've paid for decades on a house, to me, that is just, it makes absolutely no sense. And I would love a society where it's like, you have put in that work, you have put in that effort, you have paid that mortgage, and you no longer have to pay. Live out your life in your home, and that's it. And so those are the kinds of wishes that I have for creating a viable, cohesive community where we have everything that we need to survive and thrive. And starting with our young people, they shouldn't want for anything. They should be taken care of. And they should just be able to go to school and create and become the full, wonderful human beings that they were deserve to become. And so it's the off-ramp, right? Get out the way if you're not willing to contribute to that type of society.
Yo, Deep Mesfin Johnson and Sean Pierce had a moment about these dreams, and they said, but it's so possible. Like, what you're saying, I'm like, walk across the street on Mack Avenue into Grosse Pointe, and that's that. Like, sheesh. Right. Erin, I'm posing the same question to you.
So I'll start with big dreams, and then I'm going to give you some numbers, because these are attainable dreams. They are things that can come true. So I think for me, for starters, I dream of a Detroit where when someone goes away to college and comes back, people don't say, wow, now why would you do that? Yeah. They are like, of course you came back. Right. You want to be here. This is where the action is. This is where good things are happening. This is the Wakanda of America, right? Like, that's my dream for Detroit, right? I dream of a Detroit where we have reliable public transit that's robust, that gets people to their jobs, to pick up their kids from school, like so many other metropolitan cities, that brings new industry into our community so that people can have jobs that are ever evolving, that ensure that they have continued employment. I dream of people making living wages so that they can actually pay their bills. I dream of a city where, first, We've compensated people for their past wrongs, right? Like when we illegally stole their homes, we've given them some money back. I dream of that. But then I dream of a city where that doesn't happen anymore.
Come on.
That there's not such a scarcity mindset that allows our politicians to sleep at night while stealing from their constituents, okay? To put it, dollars and cents, because I love to drive it home, what else could we do with the more than $300 million, the one out of every $3 from the city's general fund that we spend on police? What could we do with that money instead? Well, for starters, we could build 18 restorative justice centers for $17 million apiece. We could provide a $10,000 child care tax income credit to more than 31,000 families when 40% or more of children in Detroit are living in poverty, right? We could create mental health and rehabilitation facilities with beds for 244 patients at $1.3 million per bed. We could create more than 10,000 living wage jobs for people in the city. We could house every homeless person in Detroit and give them a $5,000 tax credit. Within 2 years, we could modernize and renovate all DPS schools. We could do that. All of this, we have the money to do it. But we are allocating it in the wrong places. So if we want to dream, we have to dream with our dollars. Okay?
That's right. Come on. Not to mention it's $800 million in ARPA funds sitting in the city not being spent right now.
Yes.
Tawana, can I put you on the spot?
Yes.
Can you close us out with some of your words? Some of your bars?
Yeah. Okay. This is a since we're doing hopeful, and can I do a repeat? Is that okay?
Sure.
For this? Since we're being hopeful, we're ending hopefully with our dreams and stuff. I'll do my love poem for Detroit, which I do this. A lot of people like, why do you keep doing this poem? Look, nobody asked Beyonce why she keeps singing her song, so stop asking me why I'm repeating my poem. When my poem stop working and we have everything we need, then I'll stop doing my poem.
Okay, we need
We were supposed to turn our backs on you. Count down to your imminent demise, dangle you by the limbs of misdeeds. They wanted us to rate you inferior. Plagued by deteriorating neighborhoods and a convoluted history, you were never supposed to bloom from your ashes. A lot like you have been discarded like debris, deemed useless to naysayers and convictors, yet you keep rising, clinging to vitality. You refuse to allow statistics to dictate your destiny, and the media will channel your journey. And though some shall remain loyal, others will mock your tribulations. You were combing a young into maturity, both your gift and your curse, imported from adversity. You've seen better decades, yet you thrive during the worst of them. Your best days have yet to arrive, and though some won't stick around to witness your climb or rejoice in your restoration, your destination is inevitable. You've been on the bottom much longer than most, and the bridges you'll journey won't be easy to coast, but you will make it and bring warriors with you, armed with devotion. They will defend your dignity and honor your namesake. You are Detroit, the road to progression, the mirror image of endurance, and you hold the key to taking back our democracy. Thank you.
Yes, I love it. Beautiful.
I want to thank y'all for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely immaculate. I want to thank our audience. Give yourselves a hand. And the Detroit Public Theater for hosting us tonight. We want you to stay tuned for our next conversation that's happening on December the 7th, made possible. And thanks to the Ford Foundation and the DTE Energy Foundation. We will see you next time. Yeah, clap it up.